Welcome to today's episode of What the Feels, where we talk about movies, books, shows, and other media and the mental health topics they may or may not explore. My name is Brenna Talamantes, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in Texas. I work with kids and teens and specialize in grief, anxiety, school issues, and life transitions. Today on the podcast, we have Delia Issac here to talk about the book, The Murder of Mr. Wickham. Delia, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm so glad you're here. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm a licensed marriage and family therapy associate, also in Texas, like you. I work with couples, adults, and adolescents over the age of 15. With individuals, focus a lot on like neurodivergent stuff, so low
Mhm.
support autism, ADHD, depression, anxiety, and trauma-related things. And then with couples, I also work with LGBTQIA plus community. And the couples that I see, we talk about a lot of stuff, but lately it's been one or more of the people in the couple is neurodivergent, and so I'm
Mhm.
helping with, the the neurodivergent person might be unintentionally, non-maliciously inattentive to their partner, and vice versa. If there's both of them are neurodivergent. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Just helping with that education and understanding of like, it's not you.
yeah.
It's this is just their brain.
Yeah, that's just how their brain works, man. And we can teach some skills to help them out. We could teach some understanding and education as far as that goes towards the neurotypical individual. And sometimes that
Yeah.
other neurodivergent person also doesn't quite understand because ADHD and autism look very different in relationships.
Right. Right. Well, I think that that's especially since so many of us millennials are kind of getting those late diagnoses of
Hmm.
ADHD and autism, that I think that that's really important to have these conversations within couples of no, your partner isn't being inattentive. They just sometimes forget, and that it's not you, it's not lack of love,
Yeah.
it's just they forget, and it's okay.
Yeah. It's very like object permanence, man. It's not your fault.
Hmm. 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 So I think that's awesome. So
Thanks.
let's get to feeling. I'm so excited to talk about this book. So if you have not read or listened to The Murder of Mr. Wickham, here's your opportunity to pause, go get it from your local library, get it from a bookstore, read it, listen to it, come back. Okay, are you back? All right, here we go. Let's get to feeling. So here's our summary. A summer house party turns into a thrilling whodunit when Jane Austen's Mr. Wickham, one of literature's most notorious villains, meets a sudden and suspicious end in this brilliantly imagined mystery from a New York Times bestselling author featuring Austen's leading literary characters. So, I mean, we've got the Darcys are here with their
Hmm.
son. We've got this is all happening at
Emma's
oh
house,
my gosh, at Emma's house, thank you, with
the Knightleys.
the
Yeah.
Knightleys. Why is my brain so
I
and
got
then
you.
we have all of your main characters. Where it was very exciting to kind of like connect all of these characters together as I was listening.
Yes.
So here are our fun facts for today. So this is the first book of a 3-book series by Claudia Gray, labeled Mr. Darcy and Miss Tilney Mystery Series. So this is book 1. And the late Mrs. Willoughby is book 2, and the third book comes out this June. So I actually just started listening to the second book this weekend and then decided to wait until we have recorded the podcast to keep going so I wouldn't get confused. Um, Fun fact number 2, Claudia Gray is a pseudonym for Amy Vincent, and she lives in New Orleans with
No
her
way.
husband and small dogs. Yeah. And fast fact number 3, she has authored many young adult books, including this series. I think she's most known for the Evernight series, and she's also done the Constellation series, Firebird series, Spellcaster series, and she's written some Star Wars books, and some Star Wars books that are in my house. Like I
No
was
way.
looking up, I'm like, wait, Master and Apprentice, I'm like, we have this on our bookshelf. The one after Master and Apprentice, I'm like, we have that on our bookshelf. So we're a Star Wars family here. The
That's
fact that we have not
bananas.
started Bad Batch yet is kind of a crime, but we wanted to rewatch and I haven't been here. So it's a thing. We're gonna be behind. It's fine, we'll catch up.
Exactly. There's lots of time in the world. You're good.
Oh yeah. I'm having my wisdom teeth out next week, so there will be plenty of time during my husband's spring break and my recovery. We can catch up on all of the things.
Yes, exactly.
Um, so what about this book? So when I approached you, I was like, oh my gosh, we need to do a podcast together. You very non-hesitantly was like, we are gonna do The Murder of Mr. Wickham. And I was like, bet, let's go. It's been on my TBR. Let's do it. So what was it about this book that you were like, Brenna, we have to talk about it?
Honestly, so I've been hyper fixated on this series and a different series, but we'll talk about this one because this one pertains more to the mental health stuff. And I just loved so much how well Claudia Gray wrote Jonathan Darcy having autism. I think
Hmm.
that just like and the way that she writes, because it's all third person, right? So she
Hmm.
writes it from his like stuff he's got going on and thoughts he has about the things that he encounters in the environment that he's in. But you also see from his parents' point of view different things that they've done to try and teach him and help him, and also their hopes and dreams and wishes for him. And I just was like, I need more people to know about this book because it normalizes, I think, not normalize, yeah, I guess it normalizes
Yeah.
the experience of autism. And I
Hmm.
need other people to be aware of it because I think there's a lot of stigma out there. I don't think I know. We know there's a lot of
Yes.
stigma out
Yes.
there about the way it looks. And I wanted other people to have just like I wanted people who have autism to see themselves in a book, and I needed more people to know about it. And I was like, this is probably the best way to do that.
This is hopefully my one tangent. I told you before we started recording that I've read all of the like Rick Riordan series. I'm
Hmm.
like on the third and fourth one right now. He has a standalone book called Daughter of the Deep. Have you read? Did we talk
Well,
about
we
this? I
talked
think
about
we
this, so
did.
we talked about this. I when we
Okay.
talked about the book, I put it on my library. I'm waiting for it to, it's on a hold, so I'm waiting for it to come up so I can
Yeah,
listen to
so
it.
if y'all are looking for another character besides Jonathan Darcy, um Rick Riordan really writes well another character that has autism and has an emotional support animal. And you can really see that this kid is like doing a lot of things. Like it goes like she goes to a really great school, and you can just see her gifts shine in these
Yeah,
moments, but also then see what struggles she has that are different from her peers. So if y'all are looking for another great book that describes autism, Daughter of the Deep is also just a really good book. I was hooked. I listened to the whole thing so quickly. So hopefully that's my one tangent of the day.
I
But
can't promise that
we,
because I have ADHD. So
yeah, right. And I'm just exhausted. So we'll see how this goes. But I think diving right into it, one thing that stood out to me, I do like how compassionate Elizabeth Darcy is towards her son and just so understanding. And in the this is the Regency period, and so we don't have autism isn't labeled. Like there is no explanation for Jonathan
Mhm.
Darcy's characteristics of himself and what he struggles with and has to navigate. But Elizabeth does I loved how she kind of had this balance of she knows that they are a family of influence, but also
Mhm.
doesn't forget that like her kid is a person
Yes,
that struggles in in social situations, and so has given him tools. She gave him coping skills
she did.
without, labeling it, of like, there are moments in which you can go take a break in these social
Mhm.
situations. So go find a quiet place. You can identify a quiet place on your way in. Every one of these big houses you go visit will have a library or somewhere calm,
Mhm.
and you can go collect yourself and then rejoin the party. And he does it. One of his things that he does is he rocks. He sits and he
Yeah,
rocks, and that helps him with his emotional regulation. And so he doesn't like doing it in public. And
right.
so she's like, all right, here's some places in which you can do that. And here's some other
Mhm.
ways that you can kind of soothe yourself. So I just love how much she advocated for him and just tried to help him
Yeah,
without even knowing what was, quote, wrong, like what
right.
his struggles were. We had no label for this yet. I really wanted to dive into like find some history and things on mental health in the Regency period, and that just didn't happen this
It's
weekend.
okay.
Um,
I'm
but
sure it just would make me incredibly sad if we're going to be honest with each
I'm
other, so
sure,
I'm okay with
honestly,
that.
and so and this podcast would probably end up being like 3 hours long. But
Mhm.
I really liked that they showed that compassion and humanity of his mom.
Yeah.
and didn't shame him for his actions. And, even taking that into Juliet. So, um, all of these characters are at this house party. The Darcys are invited, and Juliet Tillsbury is a young lady. This is her first,
She's 17, she's not
yeah,
been out in society before,
right. So
so
this is her
without her
first house
parents.
party,
Yeah.
and she and Jonathan make fast-ish friends. There's some awkward
Yeah,
moments,
yeah.
but she, kind of quickly comes around to, okay, he's got some things, and that's fine.
I like the way her mom raised her though, because she talks specifically about, well, he's a little peculiar, but peculiar just means interesting. It doesn't mean bad. Like her mom's an authoress, so she has this
Mhm.
idea of like, it's just a character trait. That's fine. It's all there is to it. And so Juliet was raised with this idea of like, I guess a level of compassion in the same way Elizabeth is, but in a different way, I would say.
I just love that, and, like, the forward thinking of some of these families
Hmm.
was pretty cool, and I know
Yeah.
some of this is the author of the book,
Right.
which is great, but I love that she through her characters, she's able to have the range of the
Hmm.
villain and able to create this terrible Mr. Wickham or
Yes.
expand on the terrible Mr. Wickham.
I think that's the thing is you could believe that this is where they would be. Like,
Yeah,
it's not it's yes, it's fan fiction, a form of because it's not the
right.
source material, but you can absolutely it's very in character. It could
Mhm.
totally be canon. But go ahead, I
Oh,
cut you
yeah.
off.
Oh, no, 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 and so I think it's just so great that she was able to write this range of characters from
Hmm.
the villain to the compassionate mom to the compassionate companion of like, "Alright, you have things, cool, you can," and how Juliet, I think within a night or 2 of meeting is like, "If you need to do that and get up and pace or rock, that's fine,"
Yes.
and just the compassion that she has towards him, I think is great.
Yeah. I like it first, and I think this happens a couple of times in the book with multiple different people, Mrs. Bertram as well, where they
Mhm,
see that first impression and it's almost like we are assigning morality to your behavior when it's not
mhm,
even about that. It's just that that's the behavior that you have or that's the action
mhm,
that you have. And it's not about your character or morality. It's just part of who you are. It doesn't mean that you're good or bad. Like, at one point,
right,
she's talking to, she's thinking about Mrs. Darcy,
mhm,
Elizabeth, at the end of the novel, and because Mrs. Darcy has that incident where she, gets a little too tipsy at the party,
yes,
at the dinner,
yes.
and Mrs. Bertram's face, which Elizabeth noted while she was going through that, and that's why she asked her husband that question or what I don't remember what happened. But anyway, so there was a little bit of, like, a spat of sorts,
Mhm,
and Mrs. Bertram's like, "I really should pay closer attention to not so much judging people by these things, but like giving more grace, offering more grace in these
mhm.
situations, because you just never know what somebody's going through, you know?"
Well, yeah, and they all had things. They
Hmm.
all had things going on. I'm trying to pull up because normally I do this, I'm trying to pull up, like, the cast of characters
There's so many. Gosh,
because there's
there was
so
like,
many.
it was multiple couples, and there's so much couple stuff happening in here. And I think you'd mentioned
Yes.
something about like secrecy, which we can get into later.
Oh, yeah.
But absolutely, there's this level of it's not dysfunction per se, it's just like, okay, it's like when things are fine in a couple and there's no life stressors or anything like that, they're just chugging along, it's all right. And then
Mhm.
a bump in the road happens, be that with something happening in the relationship, like the inability to have children or something externally coming from like, I don't know, a random murder at a party. Like these
Right.
sorts of things
Right.
can cause that like equilibrium to shift.
Right.
And that recalibration, if you don't have the right tools or the right kind of, I guess, the level of connection, then it can
Mhm.
make it much more difficult to come back to equilibrium as opposed to uh, with a couple of these other individuals, they got knocked down so hard, even though they had the skills. It was just like the thing that happened was so bad that it was
Right.
difficult to cleave to their partner, which I found to be so interesting.
I think we can see some of this a bit, like, the most clear with the Bertrams.
Hmm.
Um, so we have Fanny Bertram and we have Edmund. So Edmund is a minister.
Hmm.
I forget. but there's so many
Clergy
words.
person,
Clergy
parson.
person.
It's
Yeah.
all interchangeable for the most part.
He's like minister, pastor, whatever you want to call it. And so Fanny and him, they have this kind of equilibrium. They kind of have a rhythm. Yes, they haven't been able to have kids, but she's not too worried about it. They've been married
Mm-hmm.
like 4 or so years. It seems like their days just kind of chug along. They pray together, they enjoy life, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Part of one of Fanny's secrets is that she has gotten a letter from her brother that he is gay. And she obviously wants to support her brother, but is in, she's, well, I'm in this Christian framework of the time of,
Mm-hmm.
well, that's not okay, but you're my brother and I love you. But she's
Mm-hmm.
not sure how to talk to her husband about this, who's a religious like person in the community. And so
Yeah.
we kind of see them. And in 4 years, she had never had any recollection of being mad at her husband for anything.
Yeah.
And they have, it ends up being a moment of growth for both of them.
It really can
Um,
be.
and, Edmund realizes towards the end, and I forget who comes to the house kind of at the end, but there was another clergy person who ends up coming to the house and kind of is just spewing Bible verse after Bible verse, and he and Edmund are kind of going at it
Head to head
between each other.
almost.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then Edmund realizes, he goes, "Wait, I'm getting as stuck as this person that I find irritating. Wait,
Mm-hmm.
I need to shift myself." And that this person is still her brother. And so we kind of see like a full circle status quo shift in
Yeah.
this couple throughout the book, which I found really interesting.
I did like that a lot, especially because like in the beginning, Fanny seems so timid
Hmm.
and she's very religious,
Hmm.
is praying over the drop of a hat, which is fine. Honestly, it reminded me of that scene in Steel Magnolias when she gets really into Jesus and she just drops to her knees to start praying for random things. I love
Yes.
that. Anyway, so she's very, very religious. And there's a level of like she doesn't appear to have any kind of backbone. She just sort of jello, does what her husband does or says to do. Or she has her own ideas of religion as far as like I am religious and this is how I believe things and that's all there is
Hmm.
to it. But outside of that, it's sort of like, okay, I'll just go with the flow. It's fine. But
Yeah.
with this, when her husband's like, you need to write him a letter to say that you're not going to affiliate with him anymore. And she just said no. She didn't
Yeah.
even elaborate. She just when no is a complete sentence, she took that to heart. She was like, nope, I'm not
Yeah.
doing that. And I don't have to elaborate on why. And I love
Well,
that so
yeah.
much.
No is a complete sentence.
And that's what she
And I
said. She
feel
said,
like
nope.
that's something we're constantly telling our clients that are working on
Oh God,
boundaries.
yeah.
No is a complete sentence. Of course, then I have to also remind myself of that.
Oh, dude,
But
same. Absolutely same. I'm like, no, I don't have to explain further to you because I would just give you more power if I did. So no,
right? No,
nope. But
exactly.
I did love that so much. I was like, we see her, she becomes a very, and I love a dynamic character. Most of my favorite books have characters that are, they're very different than how they started in a good
Right.
way,
Mhm.
you know? So, and this is one of those, I think, very much so.
Oh yeah. And I think because we got to see a lot of like Emma and Elizabeth, like we've seen
Hmm.
kind of their dynamics and some of their big growth moments. I think Emma in particular. And so although there are growth moments for them in this book, like this book was meant for some of the other ones to have some of
Yes.
these moments.
Yeah, but Emma does have a really big shift. Like there's a point where, and I was rereading it, right, so I could be prepared for this.
Mhm.
And the same sort of she has the same thinking, the same thoughts related to her husband signing that promissory note to
Yeah,
help his brother.
his brother.
And yes. And she says it's like maybe 20 pages apart almost, where she's like, well, I can't, like, I wish he had told me, but if he had told me, I probably would have said, we signed the note. And then when he shows up later and she sees them interacting with each other and sees how down and out the brother is, she says the exact same thing. But the
Mhm.
difference is that she really believes the empathy, like
Mhm.
she's sat down in it as opposed to the sympathy. sort of like, I
Right.
can understand, I can maybe see it, but this is like, no, I don't, I absolutely would have done the same thing. Like if he, seeing them the way that they are together now, if my sister had come to me, I would have done the same thing. Like she was
Right.
able to sit down in the empathy as opposed to just being like, okay, maybe like a theoretical.
Yeah. I'm going to take a moment for those that are choosing to have not read this before they listen. So basically, all of these classic Jane Austen characters are at this house party at the Darcy's house. No, at the Knightley's house. There we go. I get my Emma and Elizabeth mixed up.
Yeah.
So they're at the Knightleys. And Mr. Wickham arrives to the house party unannounced. Our assumption is to collect some money. So he has
Hmm.
had people lose money of people that were in the house with them,
Hmm.
and he was just a schemy guy, lost had people invest, he lost all their money, and
Hmm.
he's now collecting on debts and things. So he just shows up. And it rains for 2 days, nobody can leave, so he ends up having to stay, and he ends up being murdered, and we're not going to tell you who did it. You
Hmm.
have to go read it. But he ends up being murdered by one of the people in the house, and it's not a servant. It is one of the house guests.
Hmm.
And so basically Juliet, Tilney, the 17-year-old young lady, and Jonathan kind of pair up to figure out who did it because they know that each of them was innocent. Jonathan was in the stable checking on his horse in the thunderstorm, which, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, just precious. And she
Hmm.
had to run to the loo in the
She
outhouse.
did.
And so she was not in the house because she would not use, well, she was going to use the chamber pot and then she broke it. And
And then she
so
felt
she,
shame. It's
yeah, and she
fine.
had lots of shame around that. And then I was sitting over here like, girl, I feel I'm really glad I didn't have to like deal with chamber pots.
Way back in the way
That
back.
just
Oh God, no.
no, that I would be mortified. And so I was like, yeah, girl, you run in the rain to the outhouse.
Hmm.
And so they know that they are both innocent. So they kind of get together to solve the mystery of who did it because um
The
Mr.
magistrate.
Churchill, the
Hmm.
magistrate, wants to just blame a servant and they don't want to see an innocent person hanged, which is very,
Like those core values are meeting together.
yeah,
It's why
yeah,
they make sense together.
yeah. And so then I think, but they have to navigate some challenges too because his parents are suspects and
Hmm.
there's some evidence that could go towards his parents. So his parents loved Mr. Wickham's daughter. So Mr. Wickham is Jonathan's uncle.
Hmm.
And so Mr. Wickham's daughter is his cousin. And his
Hmm.
cousin spent more time at the Darcy's house than with her own parents. And
Hmm.
they loved her and they were trying to adopt her. And then she suddenly died in Mr. Wickham's care. She was sick. And so there's some you see some grief things kind of coming up with the family. So they have some motive. And Juliet is trying to dance around the fact that the Darcys may have done it.
Hmm.
And they have, so Jonathan and Juliet have to navigate some of that. And it's
Yeah.
very, I think it's pretty well done.
Yeah, because at
And
one point
so,
she holds him accountable and he lets
mhm,
himself be held accountable. Like that's how
mhm,
trust works, man.
yeah. Yeah, and she was like, "Well, you knew that one of them left the house that night." He was just at finally, he was like, "Yeah, I did.
I
And I
did.
didn't tell you." And so the fact that he then finally said something was
Yeah.
a good thing.
And writes her a
And
note and then gives her all the other information that she didn't have that he was kind of holding on to. He's like, okay,
yeah.
right.
And so they built this trust. And so we have those families there. Then we have the Bertrams are there. And so that's Fanny and her husband. And then I'm missing a couple.
Aunt Wentworth and the Brandons.
Yes, missing two couples.
So
Um,
persuasion and Sense and Sensibility.
yes, yes. And so we have the Brandons as well with Colonel Brandon and his new wife, Marianne. And then we have the Wentworths who live in Emma's father's old house, but it's being renovated. So they were already living with the Knightleys for a little bit, but they had lost a lot of money
Because of
with
Mr.
Mr.
Wickham.
Wickham. So everybody's got some motive.
Mm-hmm.
And the Brandons,
It was
Colonel Brandon, this one's more a little convoluted.
it's the love so before he married Marianne, he was in love with someone named Eliza.
Yes.
and she had a child by somebody else, and that he raised that child. Okay, which is how like we end up with Mr. Willoughby being a diabolic person, in Sense and Sensibility. But the person that she had a child by was Mr. Wickham, so it was sort of a little bit more convoluted, but still sort of present.
Yeah. He was still angry with him
Yeah,
for a valid reason. So everybody's got the motive. We go back to Jonathan for a little bit.
yeah, absolutely. I She just does such a good job beyond the stimming and other things, but the sensory overload piece. Like
Hmm.
there's that part, especially because he talks specifically about his clothing being very
Hmm.
uncomfortable. And to be fair, way back in the way back, I can't imagine having sensory issues and having to wear, because I'm sensitive to temperature
Yeah.
and because I had some sensory issues, and being too hot just makes me irritable and angry. And I think that's true for a lot of people, but
Yeah.
it feels like,
Especially those of us that live in Texas.
oh, God bless. Yeah. Uh-huh. Anyway, yes. And so he is wearing all of these layers, has things up to his, and I don't like things up on my neck like that. Like that bothers me.
Yeah.
And he has to because it's the style of the time. Like I can really feel for him. I really understand and appreciate all the crap he has to go through with this fashion choices and stuff. And then he gets to the ball, and that's where we see that coping skill that Elizabeth taught him, but he's like he calls it the too much. When things are
Yeah.
too much, it's too loud,
Hmm.
there's too many people, there's too much going on, and the clothes and everything on top of it, like that level of overstimulation. I think he handles it really well. I think Elizabeth has done a good job of teaching him how to handle it very well.
Yeah.
But it's that whole scene is written so very well. He calls it the too much feeling.
Hmm.
Um, so when he had been a boy, this sensation had often overwhelmed him past the point of respectable conduct. Eventually, his mother had hit upon the best solution, which was for Jonathan to take a moment away and inwardly prepare for the events to come. Further up, I guess I marked the wrong place, but it says, he felt it then, the flush of heat that made his clothing even more uncomfortable, the illusory swelling of sound that made it impossible for him to pick out any individual word, the feeling that too many things were happening at once and that he could bear it no longer.
But yeah, he has lots of things that those of us that are familiar with an autism diagnosis that we're like, oh yeah. And he handles it just so well. Like he did share at one point that they were riding their horses into town or something. He's like, I wish I could just ride in my shirt, my pants. Like, why do I have to ride with all of this stuff on? I'm like, I mean, I feel you. And
Yeah.
I don't have the same struggle that you do. And I'm over here like I feel you because I'm thinking like, okay, summer. I mean, we live in Texas. All of last summer was 112. And
God,
so
yeah.
I'm just over here like I was inside underneath the fan, like, please just keep me cool. And
Yeah.
I couldn't even imagine like riding a horse with all the layers.
Like, because you have that, like the body heat of yours, then you have the heat of the animal underneath you
Right.
and all of the layers. Like, there's just too much happening.
Too much happening. Um, yeah, it's just I think that the author does such a great job just describing this in a very respectful way and
Hmm.
also gives us a great visualization of what autism could have looked like during the Regency period and how it could have been handled. And, at first, Juliet, we see him have this struggle with this internal dialogue of the rules. What are
Yes.
the social norms? I'm supposed to do this. Oh, but Miss Tilney just skewed from the rules. I don't know what to do here. So he doesn't
Yes.
say anything. And then she just perceives him as rude,
Hmm.
and he was like, but that wasn't in the rules. Like you weren't supposed to say that. And so he didn't know what to do
Yeah. He's like, I
and
have
got
these regimented
flustered.
rules. And going back to the ball scene, one of the things he uses to calm himself down is that he knows when he will be expected to touch another person. Like he's
Hmm.
aware and can anticipate it. And so when
Hmm.
she reaches for his arm, which he already doesn't like, he does not like people touching him. And he's like, okay, I can focus on this. And then she says the thing, whatever it was, something about dinner.
Yeah.
And he was like, you
Yeah.
broke the rules. You broke the rules, and now I don't know what to do.
Yeah. He's like, you're already touching me. That's one thing at a time. And I can't go here,
Hmm.
which we're all here going, yeah, that's a lot.
That
And
is a lot.
she has no clue what's going on. She just met him. And so she was a little offended, but thankfully that doesn't last very long. Yeah, so I think we see this internal dialogue of the rules all the time. We see
Mm-hmm.
him um
Because
like
rules were
difficulty with
comforting.
eye contacting. Rules are so comforting. I mean, I love rules.
Yeah, so he
And
says, but
knowing like what the expectations are and like but that just helps my anxiety. I'm like, what are we doing? Where are we
yeah.
going? What's expected? And so there are many of us that enjoy the rules because we know what's to come and we know what is expected.
Mm-hmm.
And so that we can be less anxious about that.
Yeah. He says, he still had no idea of how to talk to strangers. That was why rules mattered. Society had rules. They were sure, solid, unchanging. Steps in a dance that he had taught himself how to perform. Yes, others might find him rigid or even cold if he stuck firmly to conversing only within those boundaries, but they didn't find him ridiculous. They couldn't say he was wrong. When Jonathan followed the rules, he was safe. And I
Right.
think that part's important.
Yes.
That safety.
And we can kind of see it, like we could kind of go back and forth on whether Mr. Darcy, the dad,
Yeah.
what's kind of going on with him because I think that he likes rules and he likes order, but
Mm-hmm.
we also don't get a whole lot, at least in this book, about things that he struggles with.
Yeah, but I think when because I read Pride and Prejudice for the first time in seventh grade, and so
Hmm.
I didn't know a whole lot about mental health and stuff then, but now, like, after I started learning more about it, and I've heard people say, like, Mr. Darcy was just really rude. I don't know why people like him so much, or I don't understand why Elizabeth forgave him. And me, I'm over here like, I'm pretty sure that he's on the spectrum. Like, he is neurospicy on some level. Like, don't,
Yeah,
and so I like that because like the autism didn't come from nowhere, and so it's sort of
right,
suspected that it came from him. So I just like that she elaborated on that. Like she clocked it too and decided to do something more with it. And that made me feel better.
right, right. Yeah, good catch. So
Thanks.
yeah, although we don't see it in this book per se, like we have some like little sentences here and there,
Hmm.
but if you have read Pride and Prejudice,
There's that
might,
rigidity that he
yeah,
has, like his good opinion once lost is lost forever, you know?
yes, yes. Um, so I think so we talked a little bit about secrets. I think what's also a big theme in this book is revenge.
Hmm.
And like I don't think that any of the people who are house guests at the party like came for revenge. You know,
No.
I just don't think it's in their nature
Mm-mm.
to like want or desire revenge, but if the opportunity presented itself in in a particular scenario,
Yeah.
they all have motive
Hmm.
for revenge. I think they have all kind of chosen to like move on a little bit. Like
Hmm.
before Mr. Wickham gets there, they're like, okay, this is just the state of the matter. What are we going to do next kind of thing. And like we see I'm going to keep forgetting their names, but the ones that are supposed to be living in
The Knightley's
Emma's,
house,
yeah,
Wentworth.
thank you. I knew it started with a W, but I was like, what? Um,
Okay.
so we see with them, like the wife just automatically is like, okay, we've lost this money. He's going to go back to the Navy. No big deal.
Hmm.
Like in her brain, it's just kind of fixed. He's a little bit more upset about it because they have
Yeah.
had, he, she loved him being in the Navy because she went with him and got to
She
see a lot of
enjoyed it.
things.
Yeah.
And it sounds like she's just a very adventurous person. But
Hmm.
um, Mr. Wentworth being, you know, a man in society and wanting to take care of his wife. And it
Yeah.
sounds like they lost a child while they were out at sea. And
Hmm.
so I think he puts a lot of not maybe shame, but maybe embarrassment, but just like that's not the life that he wanted to
Hmm.
provide for her. But
Part of
and
that
he
is
didn't
just the
want to
way
have to
that,
re-sign up.
yeah.
Ah,
Part of that is just the way that his in-laws treated him.
yeah.
So it's, I mean, from the original source material, we have Anne and him were courting, and then her parents were like, or her dad was like, he's not good enough for you. He wasn't a captain at the time. He wasn't in the Navy at the time. Like, he was not
Mm,
good enough for her. And then he leaves for 7 years and comes back and like had to make himself worthy. And so he's still carrying this idea of making himself worthy. And when he lost all of that money, which made him worthy of marrying Anne in the first place in his brain, then
mhm.
he lost all of that
Right.
worth. And I like
Right.
that she's like, I don't care. I,
Yeah, she's like, let's go.
that's not why I married you in the first place. I was just happy you came back, dude. Like,
Yeah, she just was there for the adventure. And oh, so everyone kind of has this, they have the motive for revenge. And so there's um some good kind of quotes. And one of them that came out was revenge can consume a person's soul, blinding them to reason and logic. And I liked this quote because I think that people who, it reminds us that sometimes what we see in therapy as therapists, that revenge and this kind of feelings of betrayal
mhm,
and really, really big hurt feelings, people can rationalize their actions, well, to be justified
mhm,
because of this thing that happened, because
mhm,
of this betrayal, because I desire revenge. They reason and logic out all of their actions, even though
mhm,
they may know deep down that they're wrong, or we as society are like, no, that's incorrect. So
mhm.
when driven by this desire for the retribution, they're able to perceive the consequences of, they're unable to perceive the consequences of their actions or think rationally. So I thought that that was just a good
Yeah.
um bringing it to mental health of like, this is something we see
Mhm.
a lot, and not to the extent of like we're murdering somebody,
Yeah.
but like this is something that we see a lot. And I actually, I saw a TikTok video not too long ago that it- the selfish person, if they're in therapy, is probably being told by their therapist that it's okay to be a little selfish because we only see part of the story.
We do.
And
We do.
it made me sit back and think of like, how many things are we not being told? How many things
Mhm.
are already being rationalized when it comes to us? So then when we hear it, we're like, oh, well, that makes sense. Yeah.
I'm totally a questions person, so I tend to ask a lot of questions about certain things that it's not an interrogation, but the way that I kinda do a lot of therapy is like, "Listen," it's sorta like we're both detectives trying to figure out why you're doing what you're doing. Because if we can figure that out, then we can resolve it a little bit, resolve the trauma, like, work through the
Yeah.
trauma, and then probably the behavior won't be there anymore. At the very least, you can work through it and it not impact you the same way as before when it was uncovered, you know?
Yeah.
Under the rug or whatever. So, a lot of I do ask a lot of questions, not every therapist does, and I get
Yeah.
that. Everybody does
Yeah.
things differently, and, yes, I'm sure, absolutely, that I miss things, but I feel like I build a good enough relationship with my people
Yeah.
that a lot of times they'll start telling me a story, and because they know at this point in our relationship that I'm a questions asker, then I'm gonna ask questions.
Right.
And so after a certain point, like, a lot of times, I can tell where this is going and they're trying to rationalize it.
Right.
Not all the time, obviously, I'm not perfect, but I'll
Yeah.
look over and just be like,
Right. I do that with I do that with my teenagers. I kind of let them like rant for a little bit, and then I like look at them. I'm like, so what part did you play in this?
"Yes. Yeah.
Like, what did you do?
Mhm."
And
'Cause
like,
it's
not to accuse them, but also like, dude, let's have some self-reflection.
yeah, that introspection,
Yeah.
accountability piece.
Yeah. Like, you
Inside
tell
work
me
can be
what
so
part you
hard, yeah.
played.
Mhm. 'Cause,
Yeah.
like, we
The
all
beauty of
do.
teenagers.
Yeah, that's
You give
fair.
them a look and they're like, yeah, I
Yeah,
messed
okay.
up.
Mhm.
Yeah. I haven't had this conversation with one of my 6-year-olds recently because something was said in a place where they shouldn't have said it.
Mhm.
And like they kind of denied it all weekend. And then they come see me. I'm like, listen, did an inside thought just happen to jump out of your mouth? And they were like, maybe. I said, you're allowed to think your inside thoughts. You're allowed to be annoyed with people. You're not
Mhm.
allowed to get frustrated with people.
Mhm.
Who are the people we can express our inside thoughts to?
Good
Like,
job.
you can express them to me, you can express them to your adults at home, but like, we can't really do that at school.
Yeah. You're like,
Um,
There's a
and they
time
were
and a
like,
place."
yeah,
But
that's
Jonathan
so
would
deep.
ask why.
Right. Why do I have to do that? I think this one kind of did a little too, but
Probably.
yeah, but they're
Like, "But I'm
also
being
little.
honest, I don't understand. You
Right,
told me to be
right.
honest."
Well, and this is just also a developmentally appropriate thing for certain age groups.
Yeah.
Like, I see kids 2 and up. So I work with a lot of that questioning age group, like that 4 to 7,
Mm-hmm.
and they know the norms, and then they're like, why do I have to wear shoes? Why is it actually important for me to put a shirt on? Like, why do I have to keep my inside thoughts to myself? And so
Mm-hmm.
I kind of love it. I'm like, well, I don't know.
That's a good
I wish it
question.
wasn't like that. It's a really good question.
Well,
Who do you
certain
think invented that?
right. Certain things you can like be like, it's functional, it's for safety. It's, like we're in
Right.
Texas, you have to have a shirt on, you don't want to get sunburnt.
You have to have shoes on. There's stuff on the ground.
Yeah.
But then
But
I give them
that's
you don't have to wear shoes in here. You're fine. If you need to take your shoes off, as long as your feet aren't smelly. And I will tell you if your feet are smelly and you can put your shoes back on. So,
I love that.
yeah, I don't care what they do. I
Me
really
neither.
don't. Like, just,
As
try
long
your
as you
best
can
to,
like pay attention or like
like, please do not
engage.
put the Play-Doh in the carpet. And that's really all I ask.
No, that's fair. Because
The
that
paint
that
is washable.
the
It's
Play-Doh
fine.
is not. That
The
is
Play-Doh, because that's happened before.
it
And
sounds like it.
I got it out of the carpet, but it took a while, like a
You're a
month.
magician. That's what I just heard.
It took a while, but I got it.
I can't
Um,
imagine.
so revenge and like people who just have really hurt feelings
Yeah.
can rationalize a lot of things
Mm-hmm.
um to make their actions valid. And I think we see this for a lot of different people in a lot of different situations. Um, I think we can see it with grief. I think we can see it with
Yeah.
anger. I think we can see it with people who feel betrayed by people. I think we see this with people who have gone no contact with people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and on both sides of some of these relationships that people um can rationalize that what they did was correct. And
Yeah.
that's when introspection really comes into play and is really helpful. And that's why coming to therapy can be really helpful because you have
Yeah.
people looking at you and going, all right, tell me more about that.
Yeah.
Tell me more about what helped you make that choice.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think this book just reminds us that it's okay for us to have hurt feelings. It's what we choose to do with those hurt feelings and how we choose to either talk through it or whether it's with our partner, whether we're confiding in a friend.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that kind of pointed out to me that like revenge and rationalization.
Yeah. Well, I think we see, you mentioned grief earlier, saying that with grief, like we see that with Elizabeth and Darcy too, in
Hmm.
like that she thinks that her grief is worse than her husband's. And so she
Hmm.
isolates and internalizes and doesn't have that level of introspection until at the end of the book when they
Right.
have that come together moment and he expresses like I had to be strong. I had to be strong for you. I couldn't grieve the way that you've been able to grieve. I have
Yeah.
grieved. I just wasn't able to show it in the way that you have.
Well,
And
and he had some feelings of he was already blaming himself
yeah.
for sending Susanna
Yeah.
back to her father
Mhm.
while she was sick, but the doctor said it was safe to travel
Mhm.
and they were trying to adopt her. And
Mhm.
his point of view was if we can get this visit done, then she doesn't have to leave us again,
Right.
which was ended up being the same thing that Elizabeth thought through. And
Yeah.
she was like, I know why he rationally chose to send her even though she was sick. And you know what? I agreed with him.
Yeah.
And so that we could come back and we could be a family and she could be ours and we wouldn't have to do this back and forth thing again. So it kind of like that Emma Mr. Knightley moment of, oh, well, I would have said to do the same thing. Same thing, Elizabeth. I agreed to let her
Mhm.
go because the doctor said it was okay.
Yeah.
And so what she didn't realize was how much Mr. Darcy had been beating himself up
Yeah.
for
And
letting
we
her
see that
go.
projection a little bit too, because
Mhm.
he talks to Jonathan about it at one point, and I was like, okay, yes, your son is an adult, but you can't rope your son into the marital subsystem. Like that's not okay. We
Right.
can't be doing that, friend. Love you, mean
Right.
it. You can't be doing that. Or we can, but it's not
Mhm.
healthy to do so.
No.
But he does say, like, do you think she'll ever stop blaming me for this. And she didn't ever blame him for that. He blamed himself and
Right.
then projected those feelings onto her, which I found to be really interesting.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Grief can be grief is puzzling and to
yeah.
navigate grief as a family and not just as the individual can be really helpful.
Hmm.
I do find it helpful when people come in and maybe not all of our sessions are family therapy based, but
Right.
to touch base as a family to just check in where people are in
Mm.
their grief and what feelings do you have and what blame do you have for yourself or what are your thoughts of blame towards others? Let's talk about it. Let's put it out in the open because then we can we can navigate from there.
Yeah.
And so that's why sometimes I encourage like if I'm gonna see like kids of a family who's grieving, sometimes they do the first session. I'm like, how would everybody come? Everybody
Hmm.
come. We'll see who really like if we don't know where to start, let's everybody come. Let's all like talk about it. And then we
Hmm.
can go from there of like who wants to come, who feels they need to check in the most, like just navigate it from there. And if we need to meet as a family, we meet as a family.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of everyone asks me, they're like, why are you a marriage and family therapist if you don't see couples? And I'm like, well, because I still like seeing the family system because the family
Yeah.
system is very important
It's
because
very
I
helpful.
know I know my stuff comes from my family system, and that's
Hmm.
something I can recognize as an adult and as a therapist. But, it's helpful
I
to
think that
recognize
training
what goes on
itself
in
is
your
just
family.
helpful. Yeah.
The 20-page paper that they made me write about my family in grad school really did it. I learned a lot. I learned
Uh-huh.
a lot. And I think that's when my really actual good boundaries really started.
Oh, yeah.
Because I noticed how much triangulation there was. I
Uh-huh.
noticed how much of the cutoffs happened, and I'm like, okay,
Hmm.
we need boundaries.
That'll probably
um,
help. Yeah.
yeah,
I feel
and
that to
so
the
I
deepest
think
parts of myself.
I think my professor when he read my paper, like I mean, I know that I wrote my paper well and I earned the grade that I got,
Right.
and he just was like, wow. I was like, I know.
Yeah. Uh,
So,
let me tell you. So, speaking of that stuff, my professor, when he was teaching it, he drew it up on the board. And the entire time he was teaching the lesson, I was like, why'd you have to draw my family up on the board like that, sir? Like when he was
yeah,
demonstrating
just
emotional
so
cutoff and trying,
disrespectful.
I was like, yeah, that's so rude. I didn't give you permission to
Disrespectful.
do that. Like, so rude.
Yeah. Well, and it was interesting because we wrote this paper, but we also were in groups of four and then presented about our family because I think it's important that we're able to talk about our own stuff so we can
Sure.
help others. And so you know, grad school for therapists is like 3 years of therapy that
Uh,
you pay a lot of money for.
for being introspective, yeah. Like yes, yeah, absolutely. You're paying people to be
Oh,
introspective
yeah.
because that's what it
And
is.
And I think all of us in our little group, we all thankfully knew each other at least on a basic level, and so we could be very empathetic because we all of our families have stuff,
Oh,
all
yeah.
of them do, and it was a very kind of like healing moment for someone to look at me and go, "Wow, that must be really hard," and I'm like, no one has ever looked at me and said that before, and that
Because it's
was
just like that's just part
very
of the family. Our family's just like
right,
that.
and even my family members now they're like, "Well, that's just how it is." I'm like,
It's
I mean,
not though.
but it's not. It doesn't have to be. Um, and so just like with the Darcys, it doesn't have to be like this. They spent
Mhm.
8 months of suffering after Susanna's death because they just weren't talking about it. And so many things can be helped from grief to anxiety to money to navigating family can just help so much if we just talked about it.
Yeah.
Um, and because especially with like the partners that we choose, like 'cause we chose that person for a reason.
Mhm.
Um, and
Yeah.
so I think that that's important. We gotta talk about our stuff.
We
And I
do.
know
We
it's
do.
hard and it's uncomfortable,
Mhm.
but we have to.
Or it just
Because they
keeps
spent
messing
8
us up.
months just
Yeah.
being upset with each other, and they didn't even
Yeah.
know why.
There was so much distance, and I like that at one point Elizabeth does clock that she was part of the problem as well. Not
Yes.
because she was just like, "Oh no, the distance has I'm part of it. I'm part of the reason why he's been so distant because I've
Mhm,
been pushing him away and I haven't allowed him to get close."
mhm,
Yeah, I was like, "Okay." I was very happy that because we see okay, we see all of these couples, they all have some sort of conflict between each other. We see them
mhm.
grow as a couple and as individuals, and they have that resolution at the end, which made me so happy. I was always
Yes.
like, it's always nice to see when they're like, "Oh no, I fucked up. Let me fix it.
Yeah.
Um, let me let me do the talking thing and no longer do the secrets thing because that clearly wasn't working out for
Please.
me, you know. I do
Yeah.
wonder how much of that had to do with like societal standards back then and how much of it was like just their dynamic as a couple. Probably a little bit of both.
Well, probably a little both. And I think, I think it was very common in this period that you didn't really know your partner that you were marrying. And
Nah.
I think these couples kind of did.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't very, I feel like that is more uncommon.
Mm-hmm.
That they knew each other on some level before that they got married. And so I think that for these couples could be a little easier for them to at the end of something really hard to be like, this is the role I played in this,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm sorry about this part, but this is the part that I saw, like, that you did that hurt me.
Mm-hmm.
um but I think, that probably a lot of our things now, like in this time, still are coming from this time period that people didn't
Yeah.
know each other and didn't talk about their stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And they were just there to like make more babies,
Yeah, to
to
carry on
like
the family
carry on the
name.
family
Yeah.
name, the family wealth. And, I think that's still one of the things that impacts our society today,
Oh yeah.
because there are older generations that are like, no, we don't talk about this. And there's mostly the younger generations are like, yeah, we do.
Now we do.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
But
And, I was raised by a boomer, and I always say she did the best she could with what she had. I do think that we,
mm-hmm.
out of our family, talked the most about our stuff. Did I need to know as much as a kid? Probably not. But
Yeah.
it was also just her and I.
Right.
And so, like, by the time we hit high school, I'm like, this is more of a partnership. Like, every time she
Mm-hmm.
tried to discipline me in high school, I'm like, really?
Really? No.
Are you like, what are you going to ground me from? I don't really like going out and leaving you. My friends come here. So, like, what are you going to ground me from? The
Mm-hmm.
TV? Oh, that you're going to turn on and put on a show that both of us like. Okay, really?
Yeah.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
the thing that I did is not that big. I was a very compliant child. Like,
Yeah.
I really didn't do a whole lot of crazy things. And so
Me
I
either.
think that, she tried, but it's really the younger generations now, like, no, we have to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And with talking and working through it comes healing. And I don't
Yeah.
like using the word heal very often. I think mostly because I work with grief so much, and you don't heal really from that. You
Yeah.
learn to live with it and manage
Mm-hmm.
it, and give it its time and space when it needs its time and space.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, I think all of this still stems back from then, that these couples are the exception.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Because even the way that they talk to each other, and granted, this is a modern person writing about that era, so it
Correct.
makes
Yes.
sense.
I mean,
But
this
even
book
the way
was
they
written
talk,
in like 2019 or something.
yeah, something like that. Yeah. Because even when they have their conversations and they do a lot of feelings talk of like, I felt alone, as
Hmm.
opposed to you left me alone. I
Right.
felt alone. That's
Hmm.
it's the same thing, but it is delivered very
It's
differently. It
it's
elicits
less
a
finger pointy.
yeah, it
Yeah.
definitely elicits a different response than, you know, you left me alone. Because that shifts responsibility and blame too.
Right.
It's really nobody's fault.
I
So
think overall that this book offers us a lot of insight to the time period, while
hmm
also getting a little bit of a modern spin to it, because again, it is written by a more modern author than Jane
hmm
Austen, but we're taking Jane Austen's characters written in the Regency period,
hmm
um and seeing how to handle big things
hmm
through their lens, whether it's grief, whether it's autism, whether it's um loss of money, like, so loss of lifestyle, which is
Yeah.
also a grief related thing, or just navigating
I think
prior
religion
relationships.
and yeah.
Yeah. And so they're all navigating something, and just seeing how they can all kind of work through some of these things. Is it going to be perfect? Absolutely not, but we don't
No.
expect that.
Right.
We just expect and encourage understanding and learning from it,
hmm
and just trying your best the next time. So I think that this book offers a lot of different perspectives of things, and
Yeah.
everybody should read it.
I agree. It's so good.
I would love this to be like a HBO series.
I think it would be really well done. Although I'd have a hard time seeing anybody as Colonel Brandon other than Alan Rickman. So I guess I'd have to get over that.
True.
Ah,
Maybe, if Adam Driver gets a little older.
I could see that.
Maybe I could see
Maybe.
that because
Could
I
see
could
that.
see. I know a lot of people have a lot of feelings on like a Snape prequel and it being Alan Rick or not being Adam Driver, but like I see it.
Yeah.
I see it.
I could,
So
yeah, I agree. I agree. It's there. The potential is there. Definitely
yeah.
that tall, dark-haired, domineering
And just
situation
like
for sure. Yeah.
yeah, he just has that presence, but can also
Presence is a good word. Yeah.
yeah, and he can, he can be everything from Kylo Ren to I don't know if you have seen This Is Where I Leave You. And I have to do an
No,
episode on that.
I
Or
haven't.
yeah. And Adam Driver plays the youngest sibling and he's just like totally off the wall and like doesn't have his life together and it's just a mess. And so he has this
So,
range. So
yeah.
I
Well,
need
he
to
was
do a
in
podcast on that.
Marriage Story too, which I didn't like that movie, but
I haven't seen it.
it's a Netflix, it's him and Scarlett Johansson are
Okay.
going through like a messy divorce. But even the most pivotal scene, and this anyway, the director, even the most pivotal scene, I was like, this is not how couples argue. What are you talking about? They don't give turns all the time. It's not like I get to
No,
say this really poignant and pointed thing towards you and then I give you a chance to speak. Like,
no.
rarely. Let me back up. Rarely.
Yeah.
But if that
After some
were
therapy.
right, or some people do that naturally, but if that were the case, then they probably wouldn't be getting divorced. That's all
Right.
I'm saying.
Yeah. I don't disagree with you. Yeah, This Is Where I Leave You. Like Jane Fonda is the mom.
I love her.
And then the siblings are, and I'm not going to know one of them, but he's in a lot of good stuff too. But it's Jason Bateman, Tina Fey, and Adam Driver.
Oh my God.
And
That
they're
sounds
sitting
like so
Shiva,
fun. Oh my
and
goodness.
mom is a therapist. And so it's
Oh,
just all very interesting. And I love watching it
does
because I
she
just
do
love
it
the
well?
chaos. It turns out okay.
Okay,
It
because
turns out
like
okay.
sometimes we see some therapists. My least favorite thing. People are like, you should watch this. You're a therapist. You should watch it. You should
Yeah.
read this. And I'm like, why? So I can get mad that they're not doing it right, or
Yeah.
that
No, you
that
can
they
see how
ethically they
like
were wrong.
you can see how she messed the kids up. And I
Uh-huh.
think at one point she does own up to be like, I shouldn't have written about what was in your diary. Um, but you can also see how she's trying to help them as adults. So
Yeah,
like you can see both and you're just like, okay, you're just a person. All right.
I
We'll
guess.
let you live. Anything else we want to talk about with Mr. Wickham before we go? I think we talked about a lot of different
Yeah,
things.
I think we have. I don't have anything else. Yeah, I don't think so. There was a quote that you and I had that was similar from Fanny about hurting people and loving people. I can't remember.
Um,
About like,
doing what's right may be painful to us, but doing what is painful to others is rarely right.
I liked that. That's all I wanted to
Mhm.
say. That was a good
Yeah.
one.
And I think that that's a good thinker for the week of like, because
Hmm.
everyone's like, you got to do the right thing, you got to do the right thing. But is it painful to others to do that thing? I think
Yeah.
that's very poignant in the era in which we are living.
Oh yeah, I concur.
So, yeah. So, if any big feelings came up for any of you during this discussion, we both encourage you to find a
Hmm.
therapist to talk to because listening to this podcast is not a substitute for therapy, even though we are both therapists. This is just for fun. This is for giggles. This is for us to talk about mental health in a more approachable way through characters.
Hmm.
So, if something strikes you, maybe it's time to go talk to somebody about that. Um, I want to give a special shout out to Melissa Adams for our podcast artwork and Crimson for our intro music. We would love it. I would love it if you followed us on Facebook and Instagram at What the Feels to help us grow our community. You can give us a like, a follow, share our posts. If you're interested in a little bit more, you can join our Patreon community, which is also What the Feels on Patreon. And then you can follow me on TikTok. It's Telemantis Therapy. I make silly TikToks. My current series that gets the most views is things that I do that my dead mom would hate. And it's again for funnies, it's for sillies. Everything I say, she would be like, yeah, I hate that you do that. So it's just for jokes because we all cope with grief with humor.
As we
And I
should.
want to give a big thank you to you, Delia, for coming and rereading this book so we could talk about it. We hope to
Thanks for
have you
having
back on the
me.
podcast soon. And for everyone listening, we hope you all have a great week and feel your feels. And we'll see you next time on What the Feels.